Welcome to Farmers Inside Track, Food from Zanzi's podcast. I'm Lisa Kanyavena. This episode forms part of a special series with Nedbank, where we're exploring the business decisions, financial realities, and growth opportunities shaping modern agriculture. As South Africa's summer grain planting season approaches, many farmers are preparing for one of the most important periods in the agricultural calendar. However, securing production finance, or perhaps agricultural inputs finance, remains a critical part of ensuring a successful season. Whether farmers are looking to expand their operations, purchase inputs, or finance working capital requirements, understanding what financiers look for can significantly improve their chances of accessing funding. Joining me today is Desry Lesele, Senior Manager of Agriculture Client Value Proposition at Nedbank, to discuss what farmers need to know before approaching financiers for funding and how they can position themselves for success ahead of the upcoming planting season. Desry, first off, as farmers prepare for the upcoming summer grain planting season, what are the key factors financiers consider when assessing a funding application?
Lisa, thank you so much for that question. Before we talk about what Nedbank specifically is looking for, it is important that we understand the environment that farmers are preparing for this upcoming season. So we're coming off two strong grain production seasons in South Africa, which is a positive for food security perspective, and it's also resulted in abundant grain supply and softened the commodity prices. And at the same time, while input costs have eased somewhat from their peak, many of these input costs still high compared to historical levels. So what we are seeing is a season which is going to be defined by what we call cost squeeze, or what might be regarded as tight margins. So where managing margins is becoming just as important as managing the actual farming production. And I think that is really shaping the conversations we're currently having with farmers across the country. So what's currently happening is when I sit down with a farmer today, I'm not only asking whether they can produce a crop. Most commercial farmers have already demonstrated these capabilities. We've got brilliant farmers in South Africa. The question I'm interested in is whether the business or the farm that they are running remains resilient in markets or in production conditions that are becoming more challenging. I remember recently chatting to a grain farmer who said to me, Des, I can manage hard work, I can manage long hours, but uncertainty is what is the hardest thing to budget for. So I think that really captures what farming it is. And agriculture has always operated in an uncertain environment, and we do not control rainfall, we do not control commodity prices or exchange rates or input costs. What we can control is how we are prepared for those changes. So while at Nedbank, we look for the traditional measures such as financial statements, we will look for production history, we'll look for budgets, we'll look for cash flow focus. We are also looking for the quality of decision making by the farmers. We are asking, has the farmer stress tested their budget? Does the farmer understand the break-even point given this current operating environment? Have they considered what happens if prices remain under pressure or yields become lower than expected? Especially now looking at what the season that is coming up, which is considered likely to be more of a drier season. One of the interesting shifts that I have seen over the last few years being in this space, success is no longer only determined by who produces the biggest crop, and increasingly it is being demonstrated by who manages the margins, cash flows, and risk effectively. And this is what happens. Two farmers can harvest very similar yields, but they can harvest two similar yields, but achieve different financial outcomes because of the decisions that they make before they start even planting. That is why the strongest funding application, we are not necessarily the optimistic ones, but they are usually the ones that demonstrate a clear understanding of both opportunities and risk. And at the end of the day, as Nedbank, we are not only just financing the crop for one season. Our goal is to back a business that needs to remain sustainable over many times. So Lisa, I think that covers just spectrum of context of what's happening and what we actually look for and what we're considering when we assessing application for the upcoming season.
What financial and operational information should farmers have ready before approaching a bank or financer for production finance?
That's another great follow-up question, because the quality of information a farmer brings to the table often tells us a lot about the quality of planning that happens before we actually engage with the farmer. Of course, there are certain financial documents that as Nedbank will want to see. Things like your annual financial statement, management accounts, production budget, cash flow forecast, and details of the existing debts commitment that the farmer has. Those are just the basic information that we will require. But I think the bigger conversation is whether the farmer understands the assumptions behind the numbers that they are providing to us as a financial. One of the most common things that we see, especially in the current environment, is that margins are becoming tighter than they were a few years ago. And I've alluded this in the first question. We have seen grain prices softening following the too strong production season, and while the input cost remains high. What this means is that planning has become increasingly important for farmers. When margins are strong, farmers make mistakes and sometimes can be absorbed due to the margins. But when margins are tight, those mistakes can become very expensive, which is a season that we're going into. So beyond the numbers, when I sit down with a farmer, this is what the questions I'm likely to ask and the questions that I'm interested in besides just the financial information that they're sharing. I'm interested in, as a farmer, why are you planting that crop? What returns are you expecting from the crop? What is your break-even point from this crop that you're planting? How did you factor seasonality into your budget, looking at if the prices are low or yields are low? What is the marketing strategy that you have? What is your off-taker plan of this product that you're planting? And how are you thinking about risks? And one thing I've noticed is that strong funding conversation don't start with the farmer saying, I need finance. They start with the farmer explaining their business strategy. And that is the core of what we enjoy doing as Nedbank. We want to understand the client strategy. And when a farmer or a client can explain their strategy or their production plans, their cost structures, their marketing assumptions, and how they intend to navigate the seasons ahead, that ultimately presents a good conversation to start and present a good assumption to start the funding conversation. So good preparation leads to better decisions, and in agriculture, better decisions often translate into outcomes for a longer and sustainable future. So those are the key things that we consider and documents that we require. But look at holistically, if the farmer, the jockey that we going to bank can understand their business holistically and understand the assumptions that they are working on.
Desry, cash flow is often cited as one of the most important factors in terms of lending decisions, right? Why is understanding and managing cash flow so critical, particularly ahead of a new production season?
From my observation, I think cash flow is one of the most underrated success factor in agriculture. And I'm going to repeat that. It's one of the most underrated success factor in agriculture. And I'm going to explain this. One thing that I've realized over time is that in farming businesses, we all know that the spending happens upfront while the incomes only materializes months later. Farmers need to purchase seeds, fertilizers, chemicals, diesel long before the crops generate any revenue. And what makes that particularly important this upcoming season is the environment that we are operating in. We know that we're coming from a strong grains, we know costs are high and prices are low. And this alone is where farmers need to think carefully about their cash flow. If I'm going to spend this much to plant and it's going to take me this number of months to be able to get revenue, will I be able to stomach the cost that will happen in between? I remember recently a farmer telling me this. My crops look so fantastic, but my cash flow nearly cost me more stress than the weather itself. So farmers are no longer stressed heavily about the weather. They're more stressed about their cash flows. And while that is the lighthearted conversation from this farmer, there actually a lot of truth in it. One of the reasons we spend so much time as Nedbank analyzing cash flow is because cash flow often really shows us risk earlier than the profitability does. And profitability tells us whether the business is creating value. Cash flow tells us whether the business can survive the long enough to realize that value. So farmers spend time understanding their cash flows because that will show them they survive until they can get their income. And that is an important distinction. A farming business can look profitable on paper, but if the cash is tied up for an extended period, or if there is insignificant working capital during the critical stages of the production cycle, that can create significant pressure to the farmer or to the client. And that is why I encourage farmers not only to ask, will this crop be profitable, but to also farmers to reflect and ask themselves the following questions. When will my last cash flow occur? How much working capital will I need during this upcoming farming season? What happens if harvest is delayed? What happens if yields outcome are lower than the budget I've projected? Will I be able to survive with the cash flow that I currently have? These are the questions that really test the resilience of the farmer or the business. And I think one of the biggest shifts we are currently seeing in agriculture is that success is no longer about production excellence. Increasingly, success is about financial excellence and how you manage your cash flow. Farmers who consistently perform well tend to have a very clear understanding of their cash flow cycle, their liquidity position, and their funding requirements long before the planting begins. So I often say yields fill the silos, but cash flow keeps the business moving. And in the season where margins are under pressure, the understanding becomes more important for farmers to understand what cash flow and how to manage their cash flows.
Because success also has obstacles, in this case, what are some of the most common mistakes farmers make when applying for seasonal production finance, and how can they avoid them?
One advantage I have with the role or the work I do here at Nedbank, it allows me to work across different farming regions nationally and different commodities that are planted by our great farmers in South Africa. And that alone allows me to monitor and see recurring patterns. And interestingly, the biggest challenge are often not about farming abilities. Like I emphasize, we got brilliant farmers in South Africa. The biggest challenges are usually about planning, financial management, and decision making. So I'm just going to highlight a few mistakes that I'm noticing while spending time with farmers nationally. First mistake I see is engaging financiers late. So what I mean about engaging financiers late is farmers start speaking to their bank quite late in their planning space. The best funding conversation generally happens while farmers is still evaluating options and still building their production plan. Unfortunately, some farmers only start discussions with banks when planting is approaching and inputs need to be purchased urgently. And the challenge with late planning is that it reduces flexibility. Decision starts getting made under pressure, and pressure leads to less correct or better decisions. So it leads to decision making that is taken without full analysis or comparison. That's the first mistake that I'm picking, engaging banks or financiers late. And at Nedbank, we pride ourselves with being proactive and engaging with our clients to say, we can see the upcoming planting season is approaching, and let's have a conversation while time is still available. The second mistake that I constantly see is treating production or the planting planning and financial planning as two separate things. And what do I mean? Planning to plant, you already know, just say you planted maize, next day you're planting soyas. That one farmers plan quite well for. But the financial planning part, they struggle with it and they tend to keep these two separate. In today's environment, they are inseparable. We are operating in an environment where we have to consider these two without looking at them separately, especially the season that is approaching. That means we need to look at profitability as an interaction between what we plan to plant, the procurement decisions that are taken, and the financial decisions that are taken. We cannot really look at one without considering another. So another mistake that I'm just emphasizing, which is the second one, treat both the financial planning and the planting planning together. Don't separate them. The third mistake that I'm picking is focusing heavily on yields while paying less attention to profitability. And this is important with the looming season. Agriculture has traditionally celebrated tons per hectare. Rightfully so, production matter. But one of the biggest shifts I'm seeing in agriculture recently is that financial performance is becoming increasingly influenced by margin management. Two farmers can achieve similar yields and have completely different financial outcomes because they made different decisions around input procurement, financing, cost control, and marketing approach. So increasingly, the question is not long about can you produce the crop? The question is more about can you produce a crop that is profitable? And finally, the final mistake that I'm seeing is stress testing assumptions. So when farmers are planning their financials and planning their harvest, or when planning their planting, do you test the assumptions that you're making? Do you stress test the assumptions that you're making? And most of the time, farmers don't focus on that. I often ask farmers the following: what happens if the price are 10% lower than expected? Will you still be able to make up the profitability that you're planning? What happens if the yields are disappointing? What happens if rainfall arrives late than anticipated? Will you still be able to achieve the yields? The strongest business I have worked with do not plan for one outcome. They prepare for a range of outcomes. And this is the mistake that farmers tend not to plan for. They need to plan for this range of outcomes because farming has never been about certainty. It's about managing uncertainties better than the next person and better than the last season. If I had to summarize it, farmers who generally position themselves best for finance, they are those that start planning early and understand the economics and focus on profitability as production. That's the mistakes that I'm seeing around this.
Input costs remain one of the biggest expenses for grain farmers. As farmers prepare for the planting season, how can digital platforms and online agricultural marketplaces help them compare prices and perhaps source inputs more efficiently and potentially improve the financial position they present to financiers?
I think this is one of the most important shifts happening currently in agriculture. Historically, competitive advantage in farming was often assessed on whether the land you have, equipment, or scale that you're farming at. Those things still matter today, but increasingly, we are seeing competitive advantage come from better information and fast decision making. And that is particularly relevant in the environment that we are operating in today. As we have discussed, we are entering into a season with relatively comfortable grain supply following the two strong productive years and has placed pressure on commodity prices while input costs remain elevated compared to historical levels. In that type of environment that we are going into, margins become critical. And what is happening is that profitability is not only determined by what happened in the field, it's also determined by the decision that happens before the planting begins. How efficient do you procure your inputs? And are you paying competitive price for your inputs? Have you compared suppliers? Do you understand the cost structure? And those decisions can have significant impact on profitability long before the seeds enters the soil. That is where digital platforms and agriculture marketplace add value. To your question, they improve transparency. They give farmers access to more information. They make it easy to compare suppliers and evaluate options, and ultimately they help farmers make more informed purchase decisions. Technology does not replace farming experience. What it does, it enhances the decision making, and this is what we see with technology. And from Nedbank perspective, that is important. When I see a farmer actively managing procurement, understanding their input cost, and using available tools to improve efficiency, it signals strong business discipline. One of the biggest shifts I'm seeing across agriculture is the successful farmers are increasingly combining agronomist expertise with financial and commercial discipline. Farmers who consistently perform well tend to know production costs, understand their margins, and make data-informed decisions. That's partly why as Nedbank we've partnered with PrysWys, which is an online platform where farmers can buy inputs, compare price of their agriculture inputs, and the objective is to give farmers a greater visibility into their input purchasing and help them make more informed procurement decisions. And the broader lesson goes beyond just one platform. The real opportunity is using technology to improve decision quality, because the modern agriculture, some of the most important decisions of the season are made before planting. And in a margin-constrained environment which we're going into, better decisions translate into a stronger profitability, stronger cash flow, and ultimately funding proposition. So using these platforms to be able to be competitive helps, and that's where we see technology changing the agricultural landscape.
And Desry, before I let you go, what final advice would you give to farmers today as they prepare for the upcoming summer grain planting season and engage with finances over the coming weeks?
If I could leave a farmer with one message, it would be this: focus on building a business, not producing a crop. I think one of the biggest shifts that I'm noticing is that success is no longer determined solely by what happens in the field. It is increasingly influenced by the decision that happened before planting even begins. How you manage your cost, allocate capital, market their crops, or plan for uncertainties. Know your cost production, understand your break-even point, be realistic about your assumptions. Challenge your budget before the market challenges you. So farmers need to challenge their budget. And don't wait until there's a problem to engage your bank. Best conversations usually happen when there is still time to explore options and make adjustments. And there was a farmer I spoke to a few years ago who shared something that resonated with me and I've never forgot. He said to me, "Des, I've stopped predicting every season. I started focusing on building a business that could survive most of the seasons." And honestly, I think that's some of the best advice I've ever gotten since I joined the agriculture space. And I'm just going to repeat it. He said to me, "I'm no longer worried about predicting what will happen this season. My focus is purely on building a business that can survive one season after another." Because if you look at farmers who are constantly succeeding over decades, it's not because they accurately predict every market movement or weather patterns. It's because they have built businesses that can adapt to when conditions change. So agriculture has always rewarded adaptability. And some years will challenge you with drought, some years commodity prices, some years rising input cost, interest, and logistic constraints. The businesses that endure are the ones that remain financially disciplined, close to their numbers, and consciously make good decisions, and on time engage with their bank. And that's where we're sitting at Nedbank and Nedbank's perspective say, engage with us as early as you're still planning to plant, and as early as you are planning to put or deciding on the crop that you're going to put on the ground. And my final message will be this, Lisa. Agriculture does not reward certainty. It rewards preparation. If farmers who are most likely to succeed this upcoming season won't necessarily be the ones that are chasing the highest yield, they will be the ones that are making the best decision, managing their risk proactively, and position their business to perform not only for this season, but for many seasons to come.
You have been listening to Farmers Inside Track, Food from Mzansi's podcast in partnership with Nedbank. Thank you to Desry Lesele for sharing valuable insights on what finances look for when assessing funding applications and how farmers can better prepare for the upcoming summer planting season. The decision farmers make today can have a significant impact on their ability to access finance, manage risk, and position their businesses for long-term success. Join us for the next episode in this special series as we continue exploring the future of farming and agribusiness. I'm Lisa Kanyavena. Thanks for listening.